Perfect. Okay. So I believe that is recording now. And I guess first point, Irene, would be if you want to dive in and start off with point number one.
So I think it's really important when we think about this topic to separate the student from the behavior. The little comic there kind of shows maybe a not so good way of separating the behavior. So, you know, he says, okay, I'm going to criticize the behavior, not the person. And he says, the email you sent, everyone looks like it had been written by a monkey on crack. Just to be clear, you're terrific, but you do and say everything exactly like a moron would. Right? So that's, you know, kind of a bad example of it. But the idea that we really don't want to talk about the person or make comments about their personality or their anything like that, we really want to stick to the facts, right? So, you know, rather than saying you are a cheater, you might say, you know, there's some question about your written work here. You know, I'm not sure, you know, it looks a bit like this might have been taken from somewhere else or that kind of thing. So you really want to stick to facts, the things that you are concerned about, the things you've observed, and what's causing you to think this has happened. Anticipate that they're going to probably ask questions. And again, you want to stick to the facts, right? So just what's in front of you and what you've observed. And be cautious about, again, rather than calling out their personality or their ethics or things like that, you want to really stick to the behavior or the thing that you are concerned has happened. So it's all about pointing out observable, objective things that you can point to and say, you know, this right here, for example, looks very, very similar to this passage from the reading I assigned you, right? So you want to stick very much to the facts and not involve kind of, again, staying away from labeling the person or the personality, just stick to the facts.
Perfect. Yeah, and you can even, if you're talking about the behavior, even going a step further and relating it to how that behavior that you observed or the suspected behavior, how that would actually be a specific violation according to the Student Code of Conduct, academic integrity. So refer it to the policy, and there's a specific section of the different types of misconduct. So if you just can, you know, connect in that way, the student's not taking it like it's a personal attack on their character or who they are as a person. Second point would be to consider your timing. This is an important point right from the get-go as well. When you send out the notification of alleged breach letter, so that's form 1, when that first notification goes out to the student, I always recommend considering stuff like, you know, not sending it on a Friday afternoon, not sending it on a weekend or a holiday. And if you kind of go, well, you know, well, why? Well, it's, you know, if the student has a question related to the allegation, if they need to talk to you or they need to contact the student conduct office because they want to some more information about the process, if they want to contact the ombudsperson for support or student health and wellness because it's all of a sudden, you know, it causes them to have, you know, a response, emotions that they haven't felt before, and they're like looking to reach out to someone for support, but you sent it on a Friday or a holiday, like I said, all of those offices are closed. So then it sort of escalates or you know, it immediately causes them to panic, and there's not any way for them to get answers, and they have to wait until, you know, Monday morning to hopefully hear back from you or to have one of our officers be able to respond to their specific questions. Now, obviously, there's going to be times when you have to send a notification or, you know, a declaration of outcome letter to a student during these less than ideal times, because, you know, you're really trying to stick to the procedural timelines outlined in the code. For example, like if all of a sudden, like because of deadline, you've got to, you know, tell the student what your decision actually is by a certain deadline. You know, try to avoid that if possible. But I mean, sometimes there's going to be situations you can't. So if you can't wait until, let's say, Monday, for example, to send that notification email, you know, just, I guess there are things that we'll cover in a second that you can actually do to sort of address those types of situations. So we'll get to that in the next point. But one thing that's important to mention is that the code doesn't actually count, you know, weekends or holidays, but it uses business days in the procedural timeline. So if you say, you know, you have 3 business days to respond to the student or to send this notification, it's not counting weekends and holidays and stuff like that anyways. So you can usually wait and the clock's not actually ticking during these times. Yeah, so if you have to, send the email out to the student in these less than ideal times, and then consider this next point. And that is to do your best to personalize the initial notification email. I get asked this question a lot because there is a very specific and very formal notification letter. It's a template that instructors are required to fill out and send that to the student. And sometimes the formality of that notification letter causes certain instructors to kind of feel like, I'm not comfortable with that. I don't even know whether I want to follow this formal process that's outlined in the code anyways. I just want to handle this informally on the side, which I always point out is never great because then we don't have a formal record of it. So if the student is a pattern of behavior, we don't have anything recorded. And you definitely aren't supposed to remove those key components of those template letters. But I always say there's nothing in the code that specifically states that you can't add personalized language to the email that you sent out to the student to connect with the student in a different way, or to kind of soften the blow, so to speak, or to warm it up a little bit. You don't have to just say, and this is this is where it can become a little more, I guess, custom tailored to your personality and the student that you're interacting with. But you don't have to just say, dear student, please read attached letter. Regards, Dr. So-and-so. You can add a lot more personal details, or information than that. You can, like I said, based on your personality, your relationship with the student. I've even seen instructors sort of like apologize for having to include, have it come out as a formal letter, but they go on to explain that the university, has put into place, this process, this policy to ensure a fair and consistent process for the student and to ensure that their rights are protected. So it's sort of, if it's spun in that way, then sometimes the student understands, okay, this formal process, it's something that you have to do as an instructor or a professor. It's not just because you're out to get me, or you crafted this formal notification letter yourself, like it's typed out by you, but you just filled out the template and submit it to them, and you can sort of add these other accompanying, you can, like I said, you can soften it up in the email. So the point is, I guess this specific point is one that probably resonates most with instructors that connect with and have a relationship with their students. So it's a way to help you protect and secure that relationship with the student while still at the same time protecting academic integrity. So you're still not letting the student get away with something that's a violation of academic integrity, but it's a way to sort of soften it up a little bit. Point number 4 is pretty straightforward, and that is just as much as possible to create clarity. So the more information a student has, the less stress the less stressed they're likely going to be. So just make sure that you refer them to the step-by-step procedural flow chart for students. This one, if you've gone through the process, this looks very similar to the one that we provide to instructors, but it's from a student perspective, so it has a little bit different details in there. But it enables, like, having this flow chart would let the student know what to expect next. And I've had, I guess, a thought that, oh, I would love to send this email out to a student because I received a notification that a student's been accused of plagiarizing, for example. But the communication is always supposed to be from the instructor to the student, or from the dean to the student, depending on the situation. It's not actually supposed to be like proactive emails being sent out from student affairs. Oops. So this would be something that you could direct them to the resources section on the student conduct webpage, make sure they have the flow chart. And then along with your Form 1 or the Form 2 notification letters that you sent out to the student, just be sure to provide a clear description of what you think the student did wrong. If it was plagiarism, I have an example on the screen here. Like, how about, the student's document highlighted, showing the plagiarized sections, and then give them a specific set of links or where you think they got those copied words from. That kind of thing is really helpful. Or if a student cheated on an exam, state which questions, for example, you think that they actually cheated on and why. You could say, this question, I have reason to believe that you collaborated with another student or you used unauthorized materials because these questions were similar to those found of another student, or I found the solutions on check.com, or whatever it might be. Just try to be as specific as possible, because if the more vague that you are, the more ambiguous you are, it causes needless confusion and stress for the student. And I've seen this happen a couple of times where sometimes instructors are intentionally wanting to kind of keep a lot of the information to themselves and then spring it on the student in the meeting, right? To kind of catch them off guard intentionally, or to kind of ambush them. And I think like the intention of the meeting, if you think about it from a procedural standpoint, is, to be all the way from the beginning explaining what the student's accused of, why they're accused of that, what their rights are. And then when you come together for the meeting, they're supposed to have all that information beforehand so they can adequately prepare and answer, give you a defense in that meeting. Otherwise, if you just spring it on them, they're going to be, not prepared, obviously, to explain and give you an answer, because obviously they're going to be nervous going into the meeting. And if you just ask them, about a specific passage, let's say, for example, in an essay that they produced, but they'd have no, like it was a couple of weeks ago or something, they're not going to be able to recall it off their memory anyways. And then you could potentially wrongly interpret their kind of flustered state as guilt. It's not to say that they're innocent or anything necessarily, but just try not to do the, intentionally setting traps, but provide them with all the information so they can prepare. The fifth point is to encourage the involvement of the ombudsperson or another support person. The templates that you send to the students, explain that the student has this right, but for the student's sake, if you believe that they might be at more risk or higher risk, based on what you know of the student, it might be worthwhile just to ensure that they understand this right, and that you're okay. You can indicate you're okay with them bringing a support person. It's not going to make you think that they're trying to outnumber you, for example. You can say that you would encourage that for them to bring a support person, and actually does. I guess having a support person come along with the student, especially if it's like kind of a neutral third party like the ombudsperson, it does address that power imbalance. It does put everyone at ease, makes the student feel more comfortable because they got a third party listening to them. It probably makes you feel a lot more comfortable because you're not meeting with the student one-on-one. It's not going to be this situation where the student can accuse you of something you didn't say. And it is nice to have somebody else in the room, so it's not just you and the student. So, all right, I'll turn it over to you, Irene, for these next couple of points.
Okay. So the next few are kind of being aware of emotionally where students are at. And I think one of the really important things too is to be aware of where we are at. So recognizing that our attitudes and behavior can impact another's attitudes and behavior. And just like stress, anxiety, anger can be very contagious, so can calm be very contagious. So thinking about where you're at when you're meeting with a student, if you're still kind of really upset or have, really angry about it, have you kind of, debriefed that with someone, talked it through so that you can approach the meeting in a calm way. Think about your body language, your tone, your kind of paraverbal communication, all of those things, right? So, you could be saying kind of all the right words, but you're sitting there like this and tapping your foot and your fists are clenched and all of that, right? That's kind of giving a different message. So just being aware of where you're at. And then I like the idea too of rational detachment. So that idea that you can't necessarily control someone else's behavior. So, if someone's being accused of academic integrity, chances are they're probably going to be upset. There's not a way that you can make them happy to receive this information or excited about it, but you can at least kind of keep things calm and help them to take that information out without kind of going into extreme panic right away. So really thinking about, are you in a calm space? What are things that help you stay calm? Being aware if there's certain buttons that get pushed, right? Like maybe this student, that they have a way of pushing your buttons. Are you prepared for that, right? If that starts, how are you going to kind of be able to maintain calm and get through that meeting? And then the next piece would be, I think this is a really important one, kind of understanding the fight, flight, or freeze response. So when human beings perceive a threat, they go into fight, flight, or freeze. right? It's not necessarily a choice. So it just happens. It automatically, we either get into like an argumentative, aggressive mode, we want to run away and hide, or we completely shut down. And really, when you think about a student when it first comes to their attention that they've been accused with academic integrity, I think like Joel says, sometimes they think that's it, like I'm getting kicked out of school tomorrow, right? And for a lot of students, that kind of becomes like almost, it feels like a life or death situation. Like if I get kicked out of school, my parents are going to have a fit, they're going to disown me, I'm going to, all of these horrible things of what is going to happen comes flooding in. And it really is difficult for them to think straight, concentrate, remember anything. And so really being aware of, that first response that a student has, being able to kind of take it in stride and calm that system down. So, I often think, when students cry, we tend to feel a little bit more empathy, or we kind of relate, but a student crying and a student kind of kicking a garbage can are kind of the same, right? It's that fight or flight response, and they're not necessarily choosing what they're doing. It's just this automatic response when they feel under threat. So I think it's just important to recognize that. And I think the other part that's really important to recognize is that when we are in fight, flight, or freeze, we don't have all our brain power kind of working right. So our problem solving, our concentration, our memory is not really at 100%. So recognizing that you may say things to a student and then they might forget all about it. And the next time you meet, they'll say, you never told me that. And so just being aware of, even we talk a bit later about offering something, you're able to summarize, or the letter that they get, that they have that they can refer back to, right? Because they might look like they're listening, but inside their heads are just going crazy, right? I'm going to get kicked out. My parents are going to hate me. This is going to be the end of the world. I'm going to, all of that stuff that's happening. So really being aware of that response that students can have. The next slide. Active listening. Again, I think sometimes, especially when we're upset by, if we have a student who is kind of cheated or plagiarized, and it can feel really disappointing, right? Like, why would they do that? It's all of that stuff. And I think sometimes people feel that if they're nice, or if we're not kind of showing how inappropriate this is or how angry we are, we're kind of condoning the behavior. And recognizing that that's not the case, we can kind of very factually talk them through what's going on, all of those things. It doesn't mean we condone it. It doesn't mean that we're happy about it, but we can kind of, give them the attention they need, respond non-judgmentally, again, sticking to those facts. This is the process. This is what's happened. This is what's going to happen next. And again, restate, clarify, they might not be completely focused on what you're saying. So they might not be trying to be difficult. They're just not really able to attend completely because they're freaking out internally. So.
Thank you. I don't mean to ask so many questions. There's some feedback. I'm not sure.
Questions are good. Yeah.
So I appreciate this presentation, and I try to use many of these strategies or techniques. Unfortunately, I've had cases nearly every year that I've been teaching. And on rare occasions, the students have become abusive, threatening. One even, got a lawyer, and it was so blown out of proportion. I don't mean to preempt you if you're going to address this later, but do you have any suggestions? I've navigated it on my own, but do you have any suggestions on how to handle that? Thank you.
No, I mean, I think again, right, that piece could be a whole kind of half-day workshop on its own, is, how do I manage the situation? Because I think, definitely we can do all the things and kind of be aware of all these things and be, empathic and all of that. And someone could still just be over the top angry. And, if it turns into, name calling and, the garbage can kicking, if it, was more than one kick or, more destruction, then it really is like, we need to keep ourselves safe and we need to kind of put some parameters around, okay, we need to maybe continue this conversation at another time because now isn't going to be productive. Because yes, I think we need to be understanding and we need to, pay attention, but not at the risk of kind of being abused or assaulted ourselves, right? And so I think there's definitely a place where you can say, this is really getting very heated and I don't know that we're going to get much resolved today. So I'd like to, set up another meeting for another time. And that might be the time then where, I think I'd like to include the chair of the department, or maybe you'd like to bring and kind of level it out a bit by having some other people present. So it's not you managing that all on your own.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the piece to consider too is, if you've done everything right and you notice that this is starting to go south, the student, is heated. Maybe it's not even in that moment, but it's like it's an ongoing thing. Like the student is, reaching out and bullying, verbal, there's verbal abuse, they're threatening you, things like that. There is a non-academic code as well. So to create clear boundaries about like what's appropriate still during this investigation process and what's not, then if the student crosses that line, you have the ability to, open up a non-academic student conduct case where you can file a complaint against the student. Not to say that that's all of a sudden going to make it better, but it just like, again, I think we have to create clear expectations and boundaries saying like, no, just because we're investigating this plagiarism case doesn't mean that you can say those things, do those things, act this way. It is, there, like the student conduct or the student code of conduct, non-academic, is there to protect our community members as well. So, yeah, I guess two more points here. One would be, and this is one that I feel is actually probably undervalued in how much this affects the student's response, because Irene sort of alluded to this. Just be sure to communicate the range of likely outcomes. The tendency for our students is to assume the worst and think that this, whatever the accusation is, automatically means you're going to get kicked out of school or from their program or be expelled. So it is really helpful to, in your conversation leading up to the meeting, and it could be even really early on in that first initial contact with the students, to just share with them what types of sanctions are typical for the kind of, academic violation. Because a lot of, let's say minor plagiarism cases, most instructors are like, hey, I just want you to resubmit your work, and maybe because you plagiarized, I'll do a reduction of, your grade by 10% or something, right? But there's this, and as soon as they hear that, like, oh, okay, like it's not as big a deal as I thought it was going to be. I guess it's those cases where it's not the case. It's a student who's repeatedly violated the code, or the actual form of academic misconduct is more significant, and it is going to have a more impactful outcome. But I think for the 90%, I might say maybe 95% of all the cases that we have are more minor instances, and it would be more in this range of like, a warning through 0 on the exam or something like that would be sort of that range. It's not very often that students get 0s on courses and have it recorded on their transcript as academic misconduct. And we, in my time here in the last 2 years, there hasn't been any suspensions or expulsions or rescissions of degree or anything like that. It's all been more, even in exam cheating, you kind of see like the tool that I put on the right hand side. So you have the sanction intensity gradient, which is what we typically provide students with, so they can sort of see this range. But a new tool that we've actually put out and made available to faculty members is based off the last 2 years of historical data, seeing like because we put the power, in the hands of the instructor to decide what sanction they see is appropriate within their course, right? But then we have all this institutional data where we can now look at, well, let's say for minor cases of cheating, what types of sanctions did instructors implement, right? So it's ranged from on the low end, from warnings right up to a reduced grade on the exam or a reduced grade on the course, right? So then you can actually, and that's sort of what we encourage, like that range would be what we encourage instructors to, when they come to a decision to uphold an allegation, we'd refer them to this tool to make sure that they're sort of in the ballpark and they're not being too excessive and they're not being too lenient. So you can even be transparent and show students that template too. It's on their website. It's not like it's hidden or behind the scenes. They can look at that. And again, I think in most cases, if they kind of look at their particular violation, they're going to be a little bit more at ease knowing that it's not going to necessarily mean expulsion or rescission of their degree. One of the things that I guess you do have to be careful of, though, is you don't want to make promises that you can't keep, right? So right at the beginning of the, you don't actually have all the facts, you haven't met with the students, you don't want to tell them what the outcome is going to be, but you can kind of provide them a general range. So yeah, be careful not to make promises that you can't keep. One of the other things, though, that students often wonder is like whether every academic misconduct is going to go on their official record or transcript. And you can clarify that, a record actually only goes on their transcript if they get a 0 on a course or, suspension, expulsion, rescission of degree. So like basically from 9 through 12 on that sanction intensity gradient, that would be the only time that it shows up officially on their student record. The rest of these instances are only kept in our student conduct database, which is something separate. It's just with student affairs, just to track institutional data and also to know whether a student has a prior record or not and who's actually going to be carrying out the investigation. So again, that's another thing that a student knows, oh, I'm not going to get kicked out of school. I might just get a 0 on that assignment and it's not going to go on my record. Whew, okay, I can calm down a little bit now. And I'm not just going to like come at you, with claws and teeth out, just wanting to, fight to the death. They're going to hopefully approach it, knowing that they're likely, it probably in many people's opinions, getting a very lenient, very understanding outcome. Okay.
And then the last thing to kind of finish off is offering something. We can always offer something, even if it's very, very basic. So even things like definitely what Joel's been talking about, offering information is a huge piece that we can do. Many times when I see a student who's come to my office because they're in a panic because they've just been notified about an academic integrity issue or something like that, as soon as I get into what the process looks like and what various outcomes might be, I can see them calm right in front of me because they're coming into my office, getting ready to tell me basically, I'm going to be kicked out of school tomorrow. What do I do? And we kind of talk through, okay, that's something that might happen, but there's all these steps that happen first. This is the process. These are the people who you're going to be in touch with. And as soon as they start to kind of get a sense that, okay, no, there's a process, this isn't happening overnight, it can help them calm. So I think the biggest thing that faculty and instructors can do is provide information, right? And probably the best way to provide it is some kind of written document, because the students, again, are going to have difficulty really attending because they're going to be so stressed out. Other things that can be kind of provided, some time, like just giving some space for them to be kind of quiet, some privacy, access to a phone if they want to call someone, contact information. So, the next person who you're going to need to talk to is so-and-so, here's their card with their phone number and their information. Offering resources, like, do you want to talk to someone? Do you want to, call a helpline or providing this? Oftentimes, if you have these things in your office, they just see them, right? So, the number for Good to Talk, the number for student health and wellness, that kind of thing, if they are wanting to debrief what's happened. And again, sometimes it's about, if it seems like everything's kind of going in circles, being able to say, this is a lot of information. Let's kind of, plan to meet to discuss it further at another point, right? If it seems like you're just getting stuck in, over either they're overly anxious or overly angry. Okay, let's stop for today and, set up another time to meet. And, what do you need in the meantime? And really trying to bring things to the short term, right? It's not an overnight process, and it is a process. And, they'll be informed as they go through it. So.
Yeah, so those are the 10 points we wanted to cover today. I know that's a lot of information. Hopefully you found like a couple of those things that maybe are new tools that you haven't implemented before. Hopefully we're not just, going through everything you already know, but I think now, we're moving more to that, and we got about 10 minutes left. If you have specifics, I know that we kind of got on little tangents getting into some of the specifics. That's great. I'm glad that you're willing to kind of interact on this and bring up specific scenarios and that. So I'm going to actually stop recording right now, just so we can talk a little bit more candidly.